When I was clawing my way through college, chasing a marine biology degree at a small state school in Northern California, I took a job at the Azure Haven, this ritzy seaside resort perched on a cliff overlooking the Pacific. It wasn't my dream gig, swapping tales of coral reefs for folding towels, but tuition wasn't cheap, and neither was ramen. I started back when the place was a total mess. They were so desperate for staff you'd think the apocalypse had hit and everyone else had bailed. The owner, Vincent Calloway, was this silver-haired gentleman with a twinkle in his eye and a handshake that could close a deal before you blinked. He was stretched thin, juggling a mini empire of properties up and down the coast, and he needed bodies fast. I saw my opening and pitched him a deal. I'd work any shifts I wanted to fit around my classes and exams, and since I spoke Spanish from growing up with my abuela and picked up French in high school, I'd handle the international guests for a little extra cash each month. Vincent loved it, slapped me on the back, called me a real go-getter, and threw in the bonus without a second thought. The guy was a gem. He wasn't around much, always hopping between his hotels, but when he rolled into town, it was like Christmas. He'd break out the good whiskey in the staff lounge after hours, swapping stories about his wild younger days, and if you weren't on shift, he'd drag you to the Crab Shack, this upscale seafood spot down the road, for lobster rolls and laughter till midnight. Fast forward a few years, and I'd carved out a niche at the Azure Haven. I was in my final stretch at school, eyeballing grad programs and dreaming of diving into kelp forests for a living. The resort gig was always temporary. I wasn't about to spend my life fluffing pillows for sunburned tourists, but it had kept me afloat. Thanks to Vincent's deal, I'd locked down the night shifts. They suited me perfectly. I'd crash through the early mornings, stumble into lectures with coffee in hand, then clock in as the sun sank into the ocean. Night shifts paid better, $2 extra an hour, plus a fatigue bonus for every overnight you survived. And the quiet was a bonus. The resort got eerie after dark, just the hum of the AC and the distant crash of waves, so I started picking up extra tasks to fill the void. I'd restock the lobby bar with those tiny liquor bottles, sort the next day's check-in packets, even scrub the espresso machine till it gleamed so the morning crew could breeze in without a hitch. Back then, everyone appreciated it. "Ellie, you're a saint," they'd say, clapping me on the shoulder. We were tight. A ragtag family of night owls and early birds, holding the place together through storms and power outages. But time's a funny thing. People drift in and out of jobs like that. New hires, quits, transfers, and the old crew faded away, replaced by faces I didn't know as well. Then the bombshell dropped. Vincent retired. It came out of nowhere, like a rogue wave smashing the shore. He'd sold off his whole portfolio to his son, Preston Calloway, this slick, smarmy guy who oozed privilege. I'd met him once before, when he'd breezed through on a tour with Vincent. Blonde hair gelled into a perfect swoop, decked out in a polo shirt that probably cost more than my rent. He'd barely glanced at me, just smirked and muttered something about overpaid desk monkeys under his breath. Vincent had laughed it off, but I'd felt the chill. Where Vincent was all heart, Preston was a walking calculator, cold, sharp, always looking for an edge. I knew my days were numbered the second he took the reins. I was practically the last survivor from Vincent's era, still cashing my language bonus, still picking my shifts like some untouchable queen. Preston didn't strike me as the type to honor old handshake deals, and I braced myself for the fallout. Part of my night routine was helping Carla, the day manager, by logging into her system to tidy up guest records, flagging VIPs, noting special requests, that sort of thing. It wasn't in my job description, but I'd been doing it forever, and Carla always paid me back with a latte from the cafe down the street. One night, I'm hunched over the desk, fighting off sleep with a mug of chamomile tea, when I punch in Carla's credentials and spot an email with my name screaming in the subject line. Ellie Marin situation. Urgent. My gut twisted like I'd swallowed a jellyfish. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew it was a breach, like rifling through someone's locker, but my fingers clicked before my brain caught up. It was from Preston to Carla, and it hit like a punch to the face. "Ellie's a problem," it started. "That ancient contract's killing us. Language bonuses, shift picking. It's absurd. We can't afford her. Make her miserable enough to quit." My breath caught. He couldn't fire me outright. Vincent's deal was locked in writing, and if he axed me without cause, he'd owe me 3 months severance, which I knew he'd hate. Plus, the resort was still running on a skeleton crew. They couldn't afford to lose me, not really. But Preston didn't care about reality. He wanted me out, and he didn't want to pay a dime to do it. I scrolled, hands trembling, and found a whole chain. Carla, Preston, and a handful of my coworkers. Jake from housekeeping, Marissa from the bar, Trent the bellhop, a couple others I barely recognized. I wasn't copied, of course. I was the prey. Jake griped that I hogged the night shifts, whining about the premium pay and bonuses I racked up. Marissa sniped that I acted too good for the rest of them with my extra tasks, like I was showing off. Carla played the middle, typing cautious replies. "We're barely staffed as it is. Ellie's holding us together some nights." But Preston fanned the flames. "Push her buttons. Make it unbearable. She'll walk, and we're off the hook." They were scheming to turn my sanctuary into a war zone, all so they could dodge that severance check. My blood boiled. I sat there, the screen glowing in the dark, imagining a dozen ways to strike back. Keying their cars, dumping fish guts in the AC vents, maybe even setting the whole place ablaze and watching it light up the night sky. But I took a deep breath. I needed something better, something that'd hit harder and last longer. At 3 a.m., I dialed my Uncle Theo. He's a lawyer. Bow ties, wire-rimmed glasses, the works. But don't let the nerdy vibe fool you. He's a bulldog in a courtroom. He answered, groggy and annoyed, but perked up when I spilled the tea. "Forward me everything," he said, voice sharp now. "Every email, every word. Then back it up. Photos, printouts, video if you can. Protect yourself." So I did. I sent the thread to my personal email, snapped pics of the screen with my phone, printed copies on the lobby's ancient printer, even filmed a wobbly video of me scrolling through the evidence, narrating in a whisper like some undercover spy. I stashed it all in my backpack, heart racing, knowing I'd just lit the fuse on something big. Theo told me to bide my time, see if they'd follow through or if it was just bluster. So I went back to work, jaw clenched, waiting for the other shoe to drop. It didn't take long. The next night, Marissa tripped and dumped a tray of martini glasses near my desk. Sticky gin splashed everywhere, and she just smirked as I grabbed a mop. Jake started leaving petty notes taped to my station. "Nice ponytail, Grandma." And one morning, my spare hoodie and jeans, which I kept in the break room for emergencies, were gone. Vanished. Then Trent, this beefy bellhop with a mean streak, cornered me by the service elevator. "You think you're untouchable, huh?" he growled, cracking his knuckles. "Keep it up, Ellie. See what happens." My stomach lurched, but I stared him down, refusing to blink. I wasn't about to let them win. Not yet. Still, I pulled back. No more extra tasks. No guest logs. No bar prep. Nothing beyond what my contract demanded. That's what sealed it. A week later, Carla called me into her office, looking like she'd rather be anywhere else. "You're not pulling your weight anymore," she said, sliding a termination notice across the desk. "We're done." I took the paper, gave her a tight smile, and walked out. They still had to cut me that severance check, 3 months' pay, right in my pocket. The next day, Uncle Theo pounced. Armed with my email trove and a notebook I'd started keeping, every spilled drink, every nasty remark, every threat, he filed a lawsuit against the Azure Haven. Wrongful termination, hostile work environment, the full Monty. Carla reportedly turned white as sea foam when she saw the evidence. piecing together how I'd gotten it. Preston was sipping Chianti on some overpriced vineyard tour in Tuscany when his phone blew up. He had to ditch his fancy getaway and jet back to face the music. Their lawyer took one look at our case, those damning emails, my meticulous logs, and waved the white flag. They settled fast. I walked away with my severance and a hefty bonus, enough to float me through my last semester without ever clocking in again. It felt like a win, but I wasn't satisfied. That was just round one. See, all those lonely night shifts? I'd spent them exploring the resort, noticing things nobody else bothered to. The Azure Haven was a legal disaster waiting to blow. I'd kept a journal, nothing fancy, just a battered spiral notebook where I'd jotted down every sketchy detail I stumbled across. The pool house had cracked tiles leaking into the foundation, a health hazard begging for mold. The staff kitchen had wiring so dodgy it sparked if you flipped the wrong switch. Fire trap central. The big one, though. The resort sat on a historical site. Some 18th century explorer had built the original lodge, and the feds paid a yearly grant to keep it preserved. Any renovations had to clear a preservation board, a process that could take years. I'd seen the East Wing, Preston's pet project, a swanky extension he'd turned into his personal penthouse suite, and I'd bet my last paycheck he hadn't filed a single permit. With Theo's guidance, I turned my notes into a weapon. I snapped photos, dug up old blueprints from the county office, and compiled a report thick enough to choke a whale. Then I sent it everywhere. Health department, building inspectors, fire marshals, the historical preservation folks, even the tax auditors for good measure. Within a month, the place was swarming. Health inspectors found black mold creeping through the basement sauna, shut down on the spot. The fire marshal flagged a blocked exit in Preston's unapproved East Wing, a violation so blatant they nearly arrested him then and there. The preservation board lost their minds over the structural changes. Turns out Preston had ripped out original beams to make room for a hot tub. They demanded he repay years of grants, plus fines that could have bought a small island. The fire code issues were the knockout punch. They slapped a closure order on the resort until every violation was fixed. Preston was buried in paperwork, repair costs, and a tsunami of bad press. I didn't stop there. My buddy Sam, a journalism grad scraping by at the Coastal Beacon, got a tip from me. I handed him everything, photos, reports, a timeline of the chaos, and he ran with it. The headline screamed across the front page. Historic resort shuttered over violations. Owner faces ruinous fines. Sam's story went viral. Twitter lit up. Yelp reviews plummeted. Bookings evaporated. When the resort finally reopened months later, it was a shell of itself. Preston couldn't keep up with the bills. Fines, repayments, renovations, and word spread he'd sold it to some soulless corporate chain at a massive loss just to stay afloat. Oh, and the crew who'd turned on me? Jake, Marissa, Trent. They were out on their butts when the new owners slashed the staff. The rest got cut too, which gave me a twinge of guilt, but they'd watched me twist in the wind without lifting a finger, so my pity ran dry. But the real kicker? Preston had a skeleton in his closet, and I'd sniffed it out. Whenever he stayed at the resort, he'd roll in with companions, high-end escorts, all hush-hush. It's legal in our state, no big deal. Unless you're married with 2 kids and a picture-perfect wife back home. I'd overheard whispers on quiet nights, caught glimpses of women in sleek dresses slipping into his suite. I'd even snapped a blurry photo once, just in case. A brunette in red heels, disappearing behind his door. I sat on it till the right moment. Lila, an old coworker who'd quit before the madness, had the key. She'd worked a charity gala with Preston's wife, Monica, and still had her email from some volunteer list. I fed Lila the dirt, dates, times, that photo, and she passed it along with a note. Thought you should know what he's up to when he's working late. I didn't get the play-by-play, but 6 months later, divorce papers hit the public record. Preston lost his resort, his money, his marriage, everything. Update. New boss despised me, so he rallied my coworkers to make my life a living nightmare, hoping I'd quit. I held out till they fired me, then sued for harassment and wrongful termination, pocketing a sweet settlement. Next, I drowned the resort in code violations, getting it shut down and sold off while my rotten colleagues lost their jobs. For the finale, I tipped off his wife about his escort habit, and his marriage blew up. Revenge? Oh, it was a masterpiece.